Okay, we're going. I'm going to turn over the introductions to Kevin Navratil. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rory, and thank you to everyone being here today. Thank you to our interpreter, Gabby, and thank you to our group. This is a good group, and thank you to Rory for organizing this event. So I thought Rory has already introduced himself, but I thought the other two panel members could briefly introduce themselves. To my left, we have to Rory's left, we have Jason King, a geography professor. And then to Jason's left, we have Troy Swanson, librarian, department chair, local 1600 leader.
Yes.
Go ahead, Troy.
Yeah, so I'm a librarian in real life. One of my jobs is that I'm the political director for Cook County College Teachers Union, which is the union that represents the staff and faculty at Moraine Valley, but also all of the city colleges and the 7 suburban colleges. So I'm very active in the politics of the region, and our colleges serve about 100,000 students across Cook County.
So thank you to our panel members. We really did want this to be a conversation. A lot has happened in a month and a half or so. So thanks for being here, and feel free to ask questions along the way if there's anything that we're saying that doesn't make sense, if there's things in the news that you've had questions about. I think this is one of the most pivotal presidencies that we've had in multiple generations, definitely in my lifetime. We can't possibly do justice to everything that has happened in terms of covering everything, cataloging everything, identifying, key policies and so forth. But we're going to do the best we can. We're going to talk about some of them, ones that have stood out to us, and feel free along the way to ask questions and make comments. So one of the questions we were kind of grappling with, and as the title of this event is just Reshaping of American Governance and Culture, we were thinking about what's happened since Inauguration Day, January 20th, and what stands out as consequential in this trajectory of American politics, democracy, and culture. So perhaps we could start on the far left with Troy, not politically speaking, but as far as the table, Troy, what stood out to you?
Many things have stood out over the last few weeks, I would say. I think there's some things that we are seeing that we can fairly say are unprecedented, so things that we have not seen. Obviously, when a new administration comes in, there is a lot of change over that happens, and policy changes, personnel changes, approach to government changes. So that, just to say that government has changed isn't necessarily new, but what we're seeing is a level of change across all instances of government, and the use of executive order and consolidation of power within the executive branch of government in the United States that is really never seen before. And I don't know how much detail we want to go into or how much time you want me to go, but if at the high level, that's the number one thing I would say, is a consolidation of power in the executive branch and a use of executive orders to push that power forward. Do you want me to elaborate? Yeah, I want me to give it, okay. Just a couple things with that. Number one, just a key thing is that our government is supposed to be institutions that carry forward, that are managed by elected officials. And in the United States Constitution, on the entire executive branch, there are only 2 elected people. So if you got rid of everybody else that works for the federal government on the executive branch, there's only 2 people that are put there by the voters, and that's the president and the vice president. And then they fill out the rest of the government, the cabinet, manage policy, move things forward. So the things that are happening that are unusual, so for instance, a reshaping of military control. So we have the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they oversee the military, big part of the executive branch. The removal of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who normally stay on and carry over the transition, so there's a continuity, removed and replaced. Removal of law enforcement, so we're seeing management and kind of mid-level managers being replaced in the FBI and the Department of Justice. So the FBI, right, is the police agency of the federal government. So we're seeing a removal and even accusations and kind of a political witch hunt, maybe a strong term, but a political hunting of people that were involved in previous prosecutions, especially of President Trump. So looking at career people who were assigned a job, did the job, and now punishing them for doing that job, really unprecedented. Really the move, this shift in having, like for instance, looking at like the cabinet. I think it's fair to say that this cabinet, so the people that are appointed by the president to run the agencies of government, may well be the least qualified cabinet in the history of the United States. And I won't quote all the way back to the early 1800s, but normally what happens when a president comes in is that political party brings with them the best and the brightest of that party. So they bring with senators, they bring with governors, they bring with people who have been in government and operated government to take over those agencies. What we're seeing, and there are some of those people, so don't get me wrong, but we're seeing people who were Fox News hosts to take over some agencies, people that have barely any qualifications to run a franchise of McDonald's down the street, who are now put in charge of some of the largest institutions of government, which even if they have good intentions and even if they want to do a good job, you have to wonder if you are in a position, if some of these people are in a position to handle multi-billion-dollar agencies, right? More or less running like a library of 30 people. Could you jump up to run this? And I could name some, I go into detail, name some names if you want. For instance, Pete Hegseth is a person I was just talking about as the Secretary of Defense. Has been in the military, so that's his number one qualification. Number two qualification is that he has been on Fox News supporting approaches to the military that Donald Trump likes. So then that qualifies him to jump up to the top of government. And just the word, I mean, there's even on the smaller level, Herschel Walker, former football player, being sent to the Bahamas as a U.S. ambassador. Like literally zero diplomatic experience. He ran for senator and lost, so the people of Georgia didn't vote for him in to be senator, but there was a decision that he should become the ambassador to the Bahamas, right? And we do have to worry, just one more thing, I guess. Of course, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, run by Elon Musk, coming in and just, taking a chainsaw and deleting entire programs, firing workers whole cloth. And I don't think any of us look at the federal government. Any responsible citizen in the United States looks at the federal government and says that this is a perfectly efficiently run institution. We know there's pet projects. We know there's ways to be more efficient. But I think all of us also know a lot of government agencies are operating like literally on a shoestring, barely getting by. And these are people, the people that work in these agencies are often career employees who could make more money in other places, but actually believe in the work of the government. The fact, like just a few examples, there was a time where people were nervous to eat meat in the United States. They were nervous, they were talking like 130 years ago. They were nervous to do that because they didn't know what was in the meat. They didn't know how old meat was. It could poison you, could get you sick. So if you weren't living on the farm watching it being butchered and it went to a store, you didn't know how long it sat in the store. We don't worry about that at all today, right? Flying in an airplane, it is amazing the level of precision that government employees operate in the Federal Aviation Administration, that we have almost zero commercial crashes. Up until recently, there's been a couple incidents. But your odds of dying, this is the famous quote, right? Your odds of dying driving to work are way more than flying in an airplane. And that happens because of government agencies that across this country, every morning, there are people, and this is a little side topic, there are people in the FAA that get on a 5 a.m. phone call and they identify problems. They fix radar that's out. They talk about personnel issues. They are daily operating, watching on, and these are things that we just don't know about, and we assume works like some kind of machine, but no, it's managed by people, and at all levels. Coast Guard, talk about health. And I'll close up with this. As a librarian, the government agency is the largest publisher of research information in the world, and it is normally treated as the most credible information that exists. We share this information freely with all of the world, promoting public health, making sure that we have good, solid information. A lot of that information has been pulled down from the public internet, and we are nervous about what it becomes. And even if it goes back, now we have with Robert Kennedy Jr. as the new head of of Health and Human Services. We have to start wondering about the level of credibility that we see in this information. So you get this interesting credibility problem where maybe it's the same, maybe it's okay, but now we have a question mark floating over it where we have to watch it. And there's a ton more examples I have in my notes, but I'll save some of that as we get the conversation going. So I do worry about this chainsaw approach. I worry about why there's this consolidation of power. I worry about the reason why Congress, when they have passed laws that they expect certain acts to be carried through, why they are not standing up and saying, you're not doing your job as an administration. And that's something that I do worry, walking into a constitutional crisis, and where do we come out on the other side?
Thanks, Troy. Jason?
Piggybacking off of a lot of the things that Troy was talking about, I have just a couple of things that I would probably add to that. One is I feel like we're in an era where there's a fundamental reshaping of the world order and America's place in it. We've been living since World War II, maybe even before, in a period called Pax Americana, of this time when America was the #1 world power in the world. And with that, we had a number of different alliances with countries that we've had ancestral friendships for centuries with, Western Europe, for example. And I wonder if in the process of changing our presidency, if some of these are going to realign themselves. Throughout the world, there's a sense that globalization has failed many people. The idea that internationalizing everything, that making people more connected, has had drawbacks. And I think that that's one thing that President Trump and other people like Viktor Orban or Narendra Modi in India that have really spoken to, is this idea that putting up walls is something that's desirable. I worry about this on a number of different levels, one of which is that I think that international trade and cultural trade are beneficial for everyone. I look at what the thought of policies are going to be towards the future with regard to taxation, with regard to international trade, the idea that I get the sense that almost trade is viewed as something that we're giving up something as opposed to getting something. And these are potentially things that would have far-reaching effects long down the road. The decoupling of economic activity with international supply chains is very concerning to me. There's a bunch of other stuff too, but I feel like that's kind of the crux of my major concerns right now.
Thank you, Jason. Rory?
Thank you. I think my mic is a little...
Is it working?
I don't... Oh, there it is.
Okay.
You got to turn it on. So first of all, I think we're in this conversation, and as we've talked about, as Kevin framed this, we're sharing our opinions and our thoughts. And sort of the way in which I see this world, this democracy changing, that it's got its footings in the foundation of our country. And I look at that as a country that has formed and built its ability to say we are the strongest, most, we've got all this wealth, and a lot of it is built on the necks and the shoulders and the backs of indigenous folks and slaves that were brought over from Africa. And as a country, knowing that in the back of our minds, in our country, sort of the way the brain works, when there are traumas, and the traumas are not just the traumas that you receive, but they're also the traumas that you caused, our mind tries to wipe that away. And no better way to wipe away the history of our legacy of slavery is to deny diversity, equity, inclusion training. To say we're not going to teach that anymore. And then we don't have any responsibility for dealing with it. And it's been sort of like this thing in the back of our country's mind that, wow, we have this thing that we never healed, and this sore, a sore that never heals becomes something that becomes traumatic for everyone, depending on how you handle it. And we've seen the work to get to the point where we are in these most recent years, which has been movement for our country. We've been moving in the right direction, in my opinion. It starts in the 19th century with the abolitionist movement. An abolitionist movement is not just folks who are being enslaved, but it's folks that were not enslaved that were saying, yes, this is a wrong thing to do. That abolition movement leads to the women's suffrage movement. which said that women really ought to have the same voice as men and the same rights, and we're still working on trying to get to our country in that space. Because there should be no role in our country and our government that can't be filled by a woman. So we've got work to do. The civil rights movements of the 50s and the 60s, we were seeing movements forward, and with every movement forward, we saw a step back. And so we take 2 steps forward so that the next time we take a step back, we can still show progress. And we have to remind ourselves that in our country there has been progress. And the Black Power movement established, really was a self-expression, an expression of our value. Because sometimes the only place that you can find someone telling you that you're worthwhile is when you remind yourself that you are. And we have the LGBTQIA+ community being able to stand up and say that we too deserve our rights. We deserve to be who we are authentically at all times and all places, and have our voices heard and matter. We have to recognize that in neurodiversity, that there are people that think differently than us. It doesn't make them less than us, but truly, I tell you that there are geniuses in people that think differently than us. We are better because we have advice and thoughts and ways of approaching problems that are different than what we would have come up with. You know, McKinsey has done a study for decades, or at least over a decade, that says, and they look at the corporate, the way in which we run our company, or if you think of a company as a company, but if you have the same folks, you know, you have a company that has all men, they're all about the same age, they all went to Ivy League schools, it's brilliant folks, wonderful, but they don't have the same insight that someone could bring to the table, and that's what they found. They found if you add gender to that corporate office, then suddenly you're doing 15 to 20% better than you would have been if you hadn't had that input. And if you add race and national background differences, then suddenly you have more, and you're doing even better. You're more like 20, 25, almost 30% better likelihood of being successful. And you know, think about what would your stakeholders want? They want the ability to have that most profitable place. Well, literally, there is a case for diversity because diversity wins when you have that. And why does it work? It works because you have input, you have new ideas, new thoughts, new ways of thinking, and it makes you better. You make better decisions. And actually, people have multiple. It's just not one thing that they are. They could be all of the things that we just named that creates that difference. And what we have to recognize as a country is that we value, you know, when you think about the immigrants that came into this country, literally only the indigenous folks were not immigrants. And yet we're going to close the door. We decided that any place that would accept an immigrant like me, it's not worth being. That doesn't make sense. We are better when we have input from around the world. New thoughts, new ways of being, new desires to be there. And our country has lost sight of that in the midst of not just using people of color as examples of what we could have been better than, or whatever however you want to create that logic that having people of difference makes you less than instead of better than as a whole. It's all sort of like looking for that scapegoat. Having a scapegoat is what allows you to do evil and awful things in the name of power. You know, there was a time when looking at slavery in our country that folks from Adolf Hitler's Reich came to the United States to see how they were doing that slavery thing so well. They learned stuff from us. And now we're sort of learning from their playbook. Their playbook was to take over. Hitler was elected, but he was elected because he was scapegoating Jewish folks. And he made them the devil. Just like right now we're making immigrants the devil. And for some reason, we, as a human being, we gravitate towards that. We want to know who the enemy is, and then we want to do everything to stop that. And when that happens, somebody uses that feeling that we have to gain power. And when we look at the way power was gained, it starts, I believe, it starts back with misinformation, because you can make somebody less than you if you tell stories about how they can't do this or they can't do that, and suddenly you believe those stories. And then with that misinformation, you also start gaining power. You know, our founding fathers thought it was a great idea to have electoral college because it would protect us against the mistake that the popular vote would make and put somebody dangerous in office. The electoral college changed, though. They used to have flexibility. More and more and more, state after state after state said the Electoral College has to follow that first vote. They don't have that freedom in many states to do something different. The other thing is that with gerrymandering, there's this thing where it's not one person, one vote. We're in a democracy or what we have, this aspirational democracy, where you would think that every vote mattered the same wherever you were, but that's not how it works. Because if that were the case, you wouldn't have 50 states and all 50 states would have 2 senators, because we don't have same population in every state. And so we have this fragile experiment in democracy. We're really a republic, and we really have to understand that the rails here are in our Constitution. The question is, will the Supreme Court, will our legislators, will our senators, will our congressmen, will they lean on our history of our Constitution and abide by it, or will it be disregarded and lead to the dark side of what our future could be? And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rory. So I don't know if I introduced myself, but I'm Kevin Navertel. I'm a political science professor, and I'm also the Democracy Commitment Coordinator. And I wanted to start just with the constitutional order. So there's a system in place and it's been referenced a few different times, but we have separation of powers and checks and balances. The president leads the executive branch. And so I want to frame it that way because one could have disagreements on policy, and I think those are good disagreements to have. For example, we have a $2 trillion deficit, and people might agree or disagree on the ways to try to reduce that deficit and how to handle government spending and like Troy said earlier, reduce government inefficiencies. However, Congress has the power of the purse, and when Congress passes laws specifying how money should be spent, it is fine in the future if that new Congress, for example, that is controlled by Republicans, the House and Senate, with a Republican president, perhaps they have new directions that they would like to go with policy, and they can pass laws that direct money to be spent differently or to cut spending or to change executive departments. But to have one person freeze or block money that has already been appropriated by a constitutional co-equal branch of government violates this constitutional structure. And so to me, that process is something that I think is really key, because I think Americans, again, might like some of the spending cuts, but we would like to adhere to the Constitution with how those spending cuts take place. And I think Troy mentioned DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency, and I think that sounds great. I think it might be good to know who is leading it. I mean, last night we heard it was Elon, but before it was not Elon. These people, some of which who are 19, 20 years old, who are part of his team, have they had FBI background checks? What are they looking at? Again, we could have a Department of Governmental Efficiency. When we create a new department, they should go through that Senate confirmation. There should be vetting of these individuals, oversight of what they're doing. And I just think that those are things that are long-held norms and legal structures that we have. Because even if you're applauding this right now, and I know some Americans are, I think you would want the next president, especially if they were of a different political party, to be adhering to that same constitutional structure that we've had for multiple centuries. And I'll give another example, like TikTok. I know it's popular. I know you want it, and I'm looking at students who might use the app. But when 80% of Congress passes a law that forces a sale or divestment of it, otherwise it's blocked, and then the Supreme Court in a 9-0 ruling upholds that, that's our constitutional structure. Those are two constitutional co-equal branches of government agreeing to essentially suspend TikTok, and to have one person direct the federal government to no longer abide by that, again, violates that constitutional structure. Another just thing that stands out to me. It's kind of like when you get the 3 wishes, you know, genie in a bottle, and you get 3 wishes, and your third wish is to ask for more wishes. This is my example of that, in that I think there's really been a flooding of the zone, and I use that framework from language that Trump and Bannon, an advisor, has used, in that there has been over 75 executive orders, in addition to many other presidential directives and statements. Just to put that in a context, so in 1 month, 75, that's over 5 times as many as Trump had in his first month when he was president in 2017. It's more than twice as many as Biden had when Biden was president in 2021. So just really difficult to even keep track. We could have a 5-hour event and we'd still not be able to cover everything that he's done. So please excuse us when we're ignoring major changes. I know that Professor King already mentioned this one, but foreign policy is just such a, again, multi-generational. He mentioned Pax Americana. I had an event on this at the beginning of the semester titled The Evolving Structure in the World System. If you're interested, it's on the Moraine Valley Library YouTube site. But since that time even, there's been changes. You know, Trump's mentioned things like, well, first of all, we had the Friday situation in the Oval Office with Zelensky to you know, have that situation happen with an ally, one that has been fighting you know, a historical adversary that the United States has had, that was invaded, and to call the leader of Ukraine a dictator, and the list goes on and on. But I'm thinking of also, like, you know, referring to Gaza as the Riviera of the Middle East, and that we're going to take it over, and, you know, they're not going to be able to return. Of picking on long-term allies like Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, really belittling what Germany and France. J.D. Vance had made a comment that basically, you know, Ukraine was aligning themselves with, you know, countries that haven't fought a war in 20, 30 years, even though these 2 countries who have proposed creating, you know, military support for Ukraine have fought and died in Afghanistan and Iraq. 2 wars that the United States chose to go into. You know, picking on Denmark, a country that, again, per capita has lost as many troops in Afghanistan, defending the United States after 9/11 and trying to take Greenland. I forget the direct quote he had last night, but one way or the other.
One way or the other.
One way or the other, we're going to take it or have it. You know, Canada is the 51st state. I could go on and on, but it's just a really pivotal. And you may say maybe we're going to get better deals. I'm neglecting to say tariffs, which is another major change related to foreign policy. And maybe we're going to get a better deal with Canada or Mexico, even though Trump had his own agreement with these 2 countries during his last administration. He's violating that himself. Maybe you get a slightly better deal, but just like your own friends, if you continually put pressure on them and belittle them, at some point they're not going to be your friends, and some point you're going to need those friends. We don't know when that time period is going to be. There's going to be some sort of a crisis, emergency, or war, perhaps terrorism, that the United States would like to have those friends, and friends have memories. I have a list of 10, and I'm not going to get to them, but I'll probably just end by saying, you know, some of these appointments that Troy referenced and some of the decisions that he's made, it appears loyalty is a key aspect, and whether it's FBI, Department of Justice, and I think at some point that's going to play out. Military, you know, the Joint Chiefs of Staff was fired. I think that was Valentine's Day night. And, you know, just replacing somebody who apparently had worn a MAGA hat and said that he was going to kill for Trump. You know, we don't know whether either of these are true, but Trump mentioned both of those things. That kind of gives you a signal into what he's looking for in military leadership. Kash Patel is FBI director, again, just somebody who's very loyal. Just kind of just makes me wonder, you know, maybe it's a month down the road, maybe it's 2 years down the road, but having these institutions that are supposed to be professional, bipartisan, nonpartisan, to have devotion to one person, I think is really problematic. So I'll leave it there, and I think we're right at 30 minutes that you've been talked at. So just want to pause and see first if our audience has questions, comments, anything that you would like us to talk about. before we kind of turn it over to some questions maybe amongst ourselves.
I'm Misha Farias. I'm adjunct faculty here. I teach English second language, and this is my class. They're the highest level of learners here, so I know they've been trying to hang in on what you are saying. So there's lots and lots of vocabulary words that they may not understand. But we have people from Ukraine, from Palestine, from Mexico, from Jordan, from Haiti. We've been talking about the threats to immigrants and their decisions going forward. The United States is not a friendly place for them at this juncture. So I'm just wondering what kind of reaction you have, given what you just said, to their plight and what they would need to be looking for as they make their decisions going forward.
So I'm going to do the best I can to try to repeat the question just so everybody could hear it, especially with the recording. So we have an adjunct professor who brought their ESL class to our event, and we have students hailing from many different countries around the world, including Jordan, Ukraine, Mexico, Palestine, Haiti, amongst others. And we have used some language that might be some terms that maybe students aren't familiar with, and so we're always happy to clarify those. But also just how the question was how students who have come to the United States might feel unwelcome, or not might feel unwelcome, probably do feel unwelcome at this point under this particular administration, in part because this administration has said specific things to make people feel unwelcome in specific policies. So the question was, what can we do to re?
They have to think on their own to make their own plan. What are they going forward? I was dealing with someone from Venezuela, and I said, you might want to go to Canada. This is
Yeah.
not a good place for you to be, given this administration. So they're starting to see that prices are increasing. What would be your advice to them?
So advice to students who are making future plans on where to live, and maybe deciding to pick a place other than the United States. So I'll turn that over to the group.
70% of American economic strength is in labor, is in the people that we have. One of the reasons, and I could talk about why America is such a strong country, but one of the great reasons that I believe that it is so strong is that we've been a country that's welcomed immigrants for generations. I'm deeply concerned about the change of this, not only for America as a whole, but also for American values and what that means. What does it ultimately mean to be an American? Is it about the genetics that we have or what our ancestry is, or is it about a set of personal values that we share? There are concerns about that going forward as well, about what will America look like in the future. There's a statistic called total fertility replacement, TFR. And throughout the developed world, countries that are called OECD countries, this number has been declining very rapidly. In the United States right now, the average family has about 1.7 children. If you do the math, you know that you need two kids per family to keep that number stable. And so as a result, the only reason that America's population is increasing at all is because we welcome in immigrants. The rest of the world in the OECD is like this as well. In Europe, the numbers are even smaller. The lowest country, I believe, is South Korea, 0.54, which means 2 families are having 1 kid each. Without numbers to sustain ourselves, we will have significant economic problems going forward. And so the demonization of immigrants is deeply concerning to me, not only because of all of our ancestry together as Americans, but also because it's not who I believe we should be as a people or who we are as a people. And it's also about what we could possibly be better than as we let in more immigrants. As far as personal decisions, as far as what to make, I'm not entirely sure. I don't believe that what's going on in the United States right now with a sort of closing of doors and closing of borders is in any way unique to the United States. Canada has deep concerns as well. Most of Western Europe is the same way. I feel like this is something that's truly happening on a global scale. And I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah, so, and again, I don't know that I have great advice in this area. I think I would just start to say that I do think it's important for us to say that there are still many people that believe in the American dream, and if you're not familiar with that term, just the idea that people can come to this country if they work hard, that they can make a new life for themselves. And I know, for instance, my great-grandfather came from Sweden in 1914, right? And we still keep in touch with relatives that are back in Europe, and that story continues. And I know it's a complicated story. It's not always a story that there's definitely are blemishes and hidden racism and all the different pieces that come with that. But that I think many of us still want to believe that the trajectory is upward in the right direction. And I will say I don't know that we all feel that way right now. In one connection that I think is important with us in community colleges is that one thing from the beginning of our country is the idea that education and learning is a foundation for democracy, and that using education as a gateway to have a healthy democracy is important. And that's why we have many of the programs on our campus, including the campus itself, that community colleges even exist as a gateway. And there's an idea from Thomas Jefferson, who is, of course, himself problematic in many ways as a slave owner, but he had the idea of oligarchy of talent, that's what our country should be. So oligarchy is a form of government where a few people control all the mechanisms of the economy. The Russian, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the rise of Russian democracy, and then the collapse of that, Russia is probably a classic oligarchy where there's a few rich people that control everything. And that is a thing we should be concerned about in the United States as Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, you name it, Bezos, as they are, lifting up and being more active in supporting this government. Are we dissolving ourselves into a new American oligarchy? But to go back to the idea of the oligarchy of talent is that our country takes people from around the world, and they take the people that work the hardest, take the people that are the smartest, and that we keep them. We've done this for a long time. American higher education is built on that. We welcome foreign scholars. Some of those scholars come and study here and they go home, and they take those ideas to their home country and better their home country. But a lot of those people stay and have families in the United States, and we built our economy on those ideas, right? And now I worry that that foundation is crumbling. And just to talk quickly about Moraine Valley, things like Pell Grants that open the door for people in poverty to get to education. The TRIO office, so again, this is a federal grant that provides support for people that are low-income folks, that opens the door for them to be successful in college. If we have systems that only benefit the people at the top, and they don't open the doors to people of talent throughout our society, I do worry that we start to erode that. And that is whether these systems exist. So even just the social safety net. So if you lose your job, you can get unemployment benefits to get back on your feet. These are all examples of supporting people who are willing to work hard to be part of the economy to move forward. And I do worry that those systems get eroded, and we're trying to work to protect those systems as much as we can on our campus here, in our colleges throughout Illinois. So.
And we are worried with all of the cuts at the federal level, even though our programs, our English as a second language program, come through the state, that we could be eliminated.
Right.
Why would this administration be interested in educating these people that are being demonized?
Absolutely. And the comment, just for the people who are online, fears, even though our ESL program, our English studies program, is funded through the state, that cuts at the federal level will ripple and have impact to the state and not be able to support that. And I do worry. I know that our state budget is very tight, so if all of our federal money, we have many federal grants that make Moraine Valley possible. If all of that vanishes, it's less than 10% of our college budget. But even if we took a 6% hit, we don't have 6% of that budget just sitting around that we can just spend. And the state of Illinois doesn't have that kind of money for every higher ed institution to replace that. And so it does put us in a very tricky situation right now. And I'm appreciative of our administrators that have to walk this line, absolutely.
Yeah, I want to thank you very much for that question about how do you know when it's time to go. And I'm as an executive director for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm in a circle of other diversity officers around the country, and that is a question that we have, and that that because we don't want to be like that, as they say, a frog in a pot that's boiling, and it boils slowly, and you don't know until it's too late that the water's too hot for you. And I go back to that example that I gave you about Hitler's Germany, where Jewish folks knew that they were being scapegoated, but they didn't all leave. They didn't know that it was going to be as bad as it was going to be. So I understand that concern. In half in jest, people say, "So where have you gotten your new passport for whatever your joint, citizenship?" And some people are actually living into that, and that's what they're trying to protect themselves from. The thing probably is to keep your options open. But the reason that there's optimism is to recognize that no matter what a landslide you've been told this last election was, it was very close. It was closer than Biden's last victory. It's closer than Barack Obama's victory. And so it's not that we can't always believe the hype. The thing that we need to look at is, well, where does that half of our country sit? Where are they going to be when it's time to, when it gets to that pivotal moment? And we've been passing some pivotal moments all along. Control over the Supreme Court, it's a pivotal moment. The thing about the Supreme Court is that they still have to make each one of those decisions. And they will have a decision to make about whether or not they're going to adhere to the Constitution or not, or what their aspiration calls the Constitution to be. And that would be very telling, because that would be the fall of one of the other anchors of checks and balances. And so there is reason for apprehension. There's also reason for hope. We have faced, as a people, we faced moments similar to this, but not to this level. And so with everything, democracy is worth fighting for. And I believe that more than 50% of our country believes in this democracy in a way that they would stand up and fight for it, that we will find a way to come together and to put our differences aside. But that may just be because I'm an optimistic person. It may be because in order for me to have resilience and for my ancestors to have resilience, they have to look back on all the successes that they've had against opposition in the past, and remember that there is a way forward, that there are examples forward where people come together and they stand up and they say, no, this is not working. That sometimes people win, and we have to remember who we are as a country and protect the sense of our democracy, and maybe ask for even a bit more insurance of it by that one person, one vote right. So I didn't tell you what country to go to, because the options are have a path and be able to use it when you need it.
Well, first, excuse me, thank you for being here, and welcome, all of you, excuse me, who may have been born in another country. It's great to have you at Moraine. It's great to have you in the United States. And, I certainly can't give advice. That's not my expertise. I do think I took a bunch of notes of things I'd like to say. I think there's a lot of unpredictability right now. I think we have the director of ICE I was trying to look it up on my phone, the direct quote, but basically saying to the effect of making people uncomfortable in the United States who are not U.S. citizens. So, you have the chief immigration enforcement officer basically taking a stance of trying to make people feel uncomfortable. So I also know that there's quotas that Trump has put for the number of people he'd like to have removed, weekly, monthly, yearly. Those numbers are currently lagging the number of deportations under the Biden administration. That's making him very upset. so they're getting even more aggressive. And so I think those are, there was also the end of, he tried to have an executive order to end birthright citizenship, also for people who might be in the United States on visas, if they have children, to make those children not be eligible for U.S. citizenship. It seems textbook violating the Constitution. I don't know that the Supreme Court, if I were to guess, I would think that they would find that unconstitutional. I can't guarantee that. There's so much I want to say on this. I just think there's a part that'd be missing if I think as somebody in my classes who talks a lot about how elections are won and lost, how Donald Trump was able to defeat 16 other, many of which really strong candidates back in 2016. I'm talking on the Republican nomination. So first, you have to win the nomination of your party to then run in the general election against the other major parties. And in 2016, he was able to outflank people like Marco Rubio, people like Jeb Bush, because he was more aggressive on immigration than all of them really combined. And it kind of brings me back, I don't remember if it's 2013, there was this major immigration reform. 68 senators had voted in favor of it. I mean, it was truly remarkable to see that level of agreement amongst the Senate on immigration. Marco Rubio was one of the leaders of it. Many people thought the Republican Party, that's what they needed to do, is be more open to immigration. They had got defeated soundly in 2012, and they had this kind of post-mortem, and they thought that was the direction for them to go in the future. And Donald Trump outflanked all of them on immigration. His first kind of going down the escalator and talking about Mexico, and the statements that he made, I don't need to repeat them. And many people thought that candidacy was going nowhere. And here we are in 2024, and I agree with the sentiments that we've expressed, but I also think if you look at public opinion polls, if you look at why people have voted the way they do, it's complicated, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that many Americans are upset with immigration policy, the number of people who have been able to come into the United States. There's so many anecdotes. I had a student last semester who was talking about how her own mom, who is undocumented, who was wanting her daughter to vote for Trump because she thought there was too many, the mother thought there was too many Venezuelans, gaming the system and being able to take advantage of asylum laws and so forth. And so I think on the one hand, it's really important to make sure that we remember I think it was Jason brought it up first, that we're a nation of immigrants. We've all, other than indigenous people, originated from somebody else, somewhere else, and we gain significantly from that. To Troy's point, we lose significantly by not having people who are choosing to come to the United States to make their lives better and to share their talents. But that being said, I think there's also a nation of laws, and we have to be clear about maintaining, for somebody in the notes I was taking, I know I'm all over the place, for somebody who cares deeply about January 6th and the way that the 2020 election was nearly overturned, and that the constitutional order that I just referenced and so many other issues that I think people on the left may care about, you need to understand that globally, migration's a major issue, and incumbents are losing soundly if they are not addressing this issue. And so that doesn't mean that you somehow endorse every single thing that Trump has said about immigration, but understand that at some point this is a very significant issue that's moving the electorate. And having, I remember there's being somebody making this comment a while ago that if Democrats don't get control of a border, an autocrat will. And some people may agree with that comment. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah.
On a personal level, I'd just like to say to our members, Diakuyu, Macy, gracias, shokran. So thank you for being, did I miss any? I think that was. Thank you so much for being here.
Next question.
because it is said that I used to say before election, I used to say before that there is no morality in politics. To say with Nicolas Machiavelli, Machiavelli in The Prince. He described
Machiavelli, yeah.
everything happened here. So I was happy to be in the library here, and I found in the library this famous book of Machiavelli. He described everything happening, but there is all the thing he described. We don't see them now already, but they have it. Trump have the plan. Yeah, you understand? So, and also everything is possible. Everything can happen in politics. Everything can happen. Not because you have politics in other human science, okay, you are wise. Not because of that, you can become the highest level of office. Because, you know, I, um, I remember I was kid. My country, so before I was born, so 1957, we had Papa Doc who became president. 6 years after his term, he began to kill a lot of people,
The Tonton Macoute.
and after he stand like president for life. Okay, president for life, and that's on 1971, before he died. Okay, his physician said, okay, you are gonna die. So he was hurt by infant or something like that, sickness. So he called President Nixon, was here or was president of the United States. He said, President Nixon, my physician said that I'm gonna die. I'm president for life. What to do? Nixon said that we are busy now about diplomacy or the world, Vietnam War, stuff like that. We are busy. Because they fear your name. Because the Asian people fear your name, put your son in power, and we will assist him. The son was 18 years old. He was the youngest president in the world. So the son followed the step of his
Baby
dad.
Doe Duvalier.
Continued to kill people, people fear, cannot talk. He was friend of his men here. He bought apartment, Trump administration, New York, something like that. In the end of the first term of his president now, he began to arm people, some area in America, okay? And there is a governor in the United States who said that he is copying Duvalier's style to stay in power for life. And I see now how he present Brown, B-A-R-R-O-N.
Right.
Baron Trump.
Like a son smile, a smart son, like that. And Baron began to shake hand with other politicians. So I hope that he's not enough smart to become a dictator. You have to be wise. Duvalier was wise. Many CIA agents here who worked with him when he was in power, they say that he was really cruel. He was cruel dictator. But he was very smart, very smart. He was very smart. So, because everything is possible in politics, okay, I studied law. It is said in law, the first right, everything has, the first right is the right to say no. We have a measure in this country. If that, I can say, we not lost already the battle, because the battle was just, we have notice of the battle. The battle will begin, or we can begin to fight the other side. Because we are not going to fight the men, we are going to fight the ideology. Because it is the ideology who face us now. We are in front of this ideology. The ideology, Republican ideology, is different than
Thank you for that rich history of dictatorship in Haiti and cruelty to stifle the voices of that are fighting that autocracy. That switched from having a point where there was a term limit to a lifetime as a dictator, and then providing a space for their son and to pass it on. And you see similarities between what happens in what has happened in Haiti with what's happening now in the United States. And you're giving us a word of caution, I trust. Did anyone else want to have?
Well, you also referenced the Machiavelli book and writer
And also
parallels
noted that we have it in the library, which is a good note.
good plug for
Good plug for the
Machiavelli.
library.
But also to keep your voice, those who oppose a dictatorship or that type of leadership, that from your experiences in Haiti, that from being able to have a voice and to criticize and to organize and to document and share your experiences and grow a coalition, all of those things to try to challenge that type of leadership. And of course, that type of leadership is exactly what we're saying that we should not have in the United States in terms of power concentrated into one person's hand, is the exact thing that the framers of the Constitution designed our system to not have. They were very concerned about that. So other...
Yeah, well, it's funny, or it's not funny, it's awful, but it's difficult to say. Republicans now are floating out the idea of a third term for Trump. And they say it, and then when you say, well, that's against the Constitution, they're like, oh, yeah, we're just joking. But there's this history in the new Republican Party of this kind of thing that is not socially acceptable, that they floated out there, then all of a sudden it is socially acceptable. So the idea, if you go back to 1984, and the idea that a presidential candidate is documented as having an affair with a porn star, that is automatically disqualifying in all of the 20th century for any party's political candidate. Now it's normal, not a big deal. We don't really talk about it. There's a list of those things. The wording that is essentially openly racist. Things they say about trans people, that even if there's areas for conversation that would be not acceptable, that would be disqualifying in the past, are now normalized. And so this kind of thing that gets floated out there now that we laugh off, possibly, even for me to bring it up now to say that we should worry about this, people will watch this and say, oh, that's a silly left-wing college teacher, that's not real. But once it gets floated out there enough, and it becomes normalized enough, all of a sudden the conversation shifts, and you can see that starting to happen. Like, one of the number one reasons that, in my personal view, that Trump ran for president again is because it's a way for him to get out of jail as he has violated laws. And so that some of those threats have not gone away. They're on hold while he's president, but they may resurface. And I do think he has an incentive, and the people in power around him have an incentive to consider if it's possible to think about ways to get to a third term. Now, maybe that won't happen, maybe that will happen, maybe that's the straw that breaks the camel's back where people stand up, but there's been many straws that we thought would break the camel's back, and that camel is just keep on marching along. And so I don't know that we're where that is. And so I do think your warning is timely and important, and there's a lot of history around us that we need to study, that the idea that it can't happen here is something we have to let go of, because it is happening here in some ways, for sure.
Yeah, Maya Angelou said that if someone tells you who they are, believe them. He told a group that we won't need any more voting after this election.
That's right. Right. Yeah. Dictator on the first day.
And more recently, since this summer, and I heard it again last night, that being saved by God from the assassin's bullet to make America great again. So that belief that the divine is behind you. And I'm going to be misquoted, so somebody can help me out. But also that if you're doing it to make the country better, it can't be illegal.
I think it was, he who saves his country breaks no laws. I think it was originally a quote from Napoleon, but I couldn't say. Which is telling in and of itself.
Yeah. Juan, you had your hand up.
Going off that, because you raised a very good point about how quickly these things can happen and how authoritarian a government and a society can change, and how power can really shift in ways that expected. And you telling us to make sure that we pay attention in America because we do have this mentality of it couldn't happen here. And I think a lot of people, especially in my generation, be it because we have families that have been here for a very long time, or that we're children of immigrants or immigrants from countries that haven't gone through dictatorships, in some time. So because of that, we kind of have this idea. We just have this idea. Well, they're just saying certain, especially when ideas are floated around. I hear a lot from my peers. Well, he's kind of just saying that. They don't really want that. They want something that's like 2 steps away from that. It's like negotiating. But I mean, there's a reason why they start, as far as they do in certain, when it comes to certain policies, why they start, at this starting point. So I mean, I think the question I wanted to ask you guys though was, what should people in my generation do to ring the alarm bells of what is happening? What should we pay attention to most? I think what concerns me personally are, I mean, there's a lot, but I think that his policies, there's some specific policies and certain rhetoric behind those policies that concerns me. One of them being the idea of occupying Gaza and turning it into something else to profit off, which doesn't sound too far from imperialism and colonization to me. It really doesn't.
I think I would say it is imperialism.
Yeah, as well as the idea of turning Canada into another state, or and then taking Greenland, stuff like that. Yeah, so I was kind of wondering, what exactly? I don't know. I guess I'm kind of asking, what are some of the best ways do you think we should ring the alarm bells of, hey, it can happen, and he wants to make it happen?
So the question is, how do we ring the alarm bells, especially to your fellow peers who might be 18 to 29? But I think with our final 10 minutes, it's a good way to kind of connect that to kind of signs for hope, or what makes you optimistic, and if there was a dictatorship, or if there was this major change of power being centralized, what can we do about it, and next steps type of deal. So maybe we could just reverse down the line, starting with Troy.
You put me on the spot first.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, okay.
You're quick on your toes.
Yeah, well, and I think first off, events like this are important, and just talking about the realities, not pretending it doesn't exist. I think that's important. I think organizing and not feeling alone, so people being together and having the conversations, and trying to offer that kind of emotional support for people that are in tough spots. And some of this can't be magically waved away, but also when you ignore it, that helps it fester and kind of grow. And I know that, like many of us here, like we are standing up for our organizations. Even in a blue state like Illinois, reaching out to legislators who may already be Democrats and may be opposed to some of these stances, but letting them know that we are still behind them, and that when they take action in Washington to stand up to this, that we will still support them and stand up. And I also think reaching out to our red state neighbors, and being on the ground, using our finances where we can to donate to causes that make a difference. I mean, I think those are things that we need to be doing, and not sitting on our hands and hoping that it is just for show, and hoping that it will go away. A simple thing that makes a difference: subscribe to good journalists. Get a subscription to the New York Times. Donate money to WBEZ in Chicago. Like, having good sources of information. Support international publications that report from outside about what's happening in the United States. Like, having good information matters, and having reporting on the ground actually matters. Join a union, form a union, support a union, vote yes on union legislation. Still remains, unions aren't always perfect, but still remains a voice for working people to stand together and to be loud and to point out issues. Just a few off the top of my head. Probably better ones as it goes down the line where there's more time to think.
When it comes to behavior modification with people, most people that I've ever met live in a world of ambiguity, where they don't feel really strongly 100% towards one thing. They don't feel really strongly 100% towards another thing, but they live deeply ambiguously. All people, for example, think that we should be helping the poor, but yet many people, if you give them $20, they're going to spend it on themselves first. So with that in mind, I find that when talking with other people, I tend to find that resorting to things like name calling is not helpful. For example, saying that Trump is a Nazi is not particularly helpful. For starters, he's got Jewish family members, which usually it makes one not able to do that. But there are things that I think that everybody would say are concerning about what Trump would do. For an example, we've had presidents before that used significant numbers of executive orders before. FDR was probably the king, and unless if Trump really stays with the level that he's at right now, he will probably never beat FDR as far as the number of people that did that. But the concentration of executive power that he was able to do with that took some time to unfold. So even somebody that's concerned about that might take a look at left wing and say, what would somebody have if they had the same powers that Trump did, but if they disagreed with you politically? Is this concentration of power something that we want to be, in effect, beyond you? Some of the things that Trump does could be seen in like a Nero-era dentist sort of a view. Talking about if Trump is a peacemaker, are the actions that he wants to do in Panama or Canada, are these things that are bringing us closer to peace? And I don't have an answer for that. I don't know if anybody has an answer to that, but I would say that working through each person's ambiguity is probably a good way of maintaining discourse. But I'm not perfect in this myself. So I think that you're raising a very good question.
Yeah, I agree with what's been shared, but I'd also suggest that it's the disinformation is something that we need to call it out. We need to be able to be in communication with each other in a way that lets each other know that we're not alone in recognizing what we're seeing and wishing for better, and sort of having communities of belief that defending our democracy is worth doing, and growing that community. And so social media is a wonderful way to do that, because right now it's being used as a vehicle for disinformation. And then we also, as Jason was saying, is there are lots of folks that are like, they like some things and not some of the others, and they too have to be able to recognize what's at stake, and then and speak up and have their voices heard. So I'm glad that you asked the question. Thank you.
I have a lot to add to the group, but I think just first of all, paying attention, taking notes, kind of journaling maybe along the way of things that are happening, and know that, you can kind of remember back, oh, I remember when this happened. And, when it gets closer to election time and kind of using those examples. And I'm going to kind of jump around with my own notes, but I do believe in the power of personal stories. And I think there's so many that one could use. And I'll just reference last night, 75%, I think it was, of the people who watched Trump's State of the Union felt good about what he said. And I think a lot of people might disagree with that. But some of the things that he did was highlight individual stories. There was a boy who had something like 5 months left to live and had brain surgery to remove a tumor, and he wanted to be in law enforcement. And, these stories are powerful. And there's so many stories right now that one could use to show the highlights of what happens so for example, hypothetically with that same boy, I don't know, perhaps NIH funding helped with the cancer research to help, him be able to live 6 years instead of 5 months. But highlighting these types of stories. Last night, Trump was highlighting people who are undocumented, who killed or brutalized somebody, and then highlighting their family. Well, pick, stories of people who have come to the United States and have saved lives, who have started businesses. This isn't hard to do. There's statistically undocumented people who have more likely to start a business, less likely to commit crimes. The list goes on and on. Spend time in groups with people who maybe you don't share beliefs with, or you have different backgrounds, different perspectives. And back to that ambiguity of understanding that not everything's black and white. I think people need to win an election. You got to have a majority of votes. I understand the electoral college, but I mean, to win an individual state, you have to have the most votes. You have to have a broad-based coalition. Sometimes groups have purity tests. You have to have this stance on this particular foreign policy issue that a lot of Americans don't understand. Have a little grace. Understand that if you can't convince other people of why this issue is so important, that not only do you lose on that issue, you may lose on a bunch of other issues, including free and fair elections or constitutional. So I don't want to lecture, but understanding that you need to work with people who may disagree with you on certain issues. The comparative literature, I teach comparative government, and the research that shows that, what are the biggest constraints on authoritarians? And it's typically the political leaders of the same party. And I know about a year ago we had an event in the library where we were kind of warning about this, that a lot of those guardrails were just not going to be there for this second term. But I think it's highlighting whether it's a Murkowski from Alaska. Some of the maybe more moderates, Republican senators that are out there, especially some of which you might be going for re-election, and sharing these personal stories, compelling evidence. But it's really going to come from, we all know, bullies are able to do what they can if their friends allow it. It's, not having a liberal professor or a professor speak out about something might just feed the beast. It's going to be more persuasive if people who might share, I'm thinking of Adam Kinzinger, a Republican from Illinois, who has spoken out, served on the January 6th committee. It's those types of things that may work. And I know I'm over time, so I'll end it there. But it's a great question. And I appreciate all of you for being here and spending time with us. We do have a second event. I believe it's in 2 weeks from today in the library. So to maybe talk about new topics, we'll have some different panel members. I want to thank Troy, Jason, and Rory for volunteering their time and expertise to be with us today.
Thank
So
you for
thanks,
having me.
everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for being here.
And when you write those journals, also write the book. The books are important. They live beyond us. In the library. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Great job.